How does the West fit into your plans, and how do you fit into the West plans?
Well, I think first of all, thank you for inviting me here. I'll start by putting it out there that I'm not just a Quebecer, although I certainly am, and I'm proud of it. I'm also someone who was raised with deep Vancouver roots, deep BC roots, lived there, worked there, got my professional start as a teacher there, and consider that I am someone who's well versed in the entire country in its breadth and depth. But yes, you're absolutely right that for far too long, you don't just have to go back a decade or two, you can go all the way back to my father's era, where our majorities were won for the Liberal Party very much leaving aside the West entirely. And I think that's been part of what has turned into something of a regionalization of Canadian politics. For me, there is no question that the path of the relevance for the Liberal Party can no longer go through careful calculations of how do we get just enough seats to be able to govern regardless of where they are, and instead say, how do we become relevant right across the country, urban and rural, east and west, English and French, new Canadians and people who've been here for generations.
You would restore federal involvement and funding to the experimental lakes area?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's environment, but that's also science. I mean, we have a government that has waged war on science by muzzling scientists, by attacking good data. I mean, the sham that is the National Household Survey is pretty much an indication that they're not making any sort of decision based on fact or in reality. We lost our head of StatsCan because of it. We would restore the long-form census. We would restore the experimental lakes. We would unmuzzle our scientists, and we would allow our public service to actually do the job it's appointed to do, which is it was created to do, which is give us the best ways as politicians to achieve our policy goals instead of being dictated to and handcuffed by a government that wants to control everything from one end to the other. The deal was people support a pro-growth agenda and growth will be good for you. Now, 30 years later, we're at a point where far too many Canadians are convinced that our kids, for the first time ever in the story of this country, are not going to have the kind of opportunities that they had. And this is really anxiety producing for people. And we're in danger of having them withdraw their support for a growth agenda. We see that by the rise in protectionism, the worry about foreign and global investment, our worries about resource development of pipelines, the worries that people feel sort of across the board that we have a government, or governments are no longer able to actually help people out. So they pull back, they get cynical, they allow themselves to vote for the least worst of the options, they allow themselves to vote against what they don't like rather than for anyone. And you get a polarization that, to my mind, is unlike us. So we need to focus on real solutions for the middle class that past generations of, or past iterations of government haven't been able to solve. And we also have to focus on restoring people's trust in Parliament, in government, because people are very active in their communities and around global issues. They just don't particularly feel that politics is a meaningful way of getting anything done or actually improving their lot in their community or actually addressing some of the challenges that they have, because the bond of trust is broken. Everyone talks about the trust that Canadians should have for their governors, for their government, but what we've broken is the trust that governments should have in Canadians. And that's why my emphasis on transparency, accountability, honesty, engaging with people openly, and mostly leaving room for Canadians in politics and encouraging them to be optimistic and hopeful and not to fall prey to the easy politics of division. These are the issues that, for me, are going to be most important for the Liberal Party. How do we fix the middle class in this country, and how do we get people to understand that their involvement in politics is how we develop those solutions?
How would you handle something like the proposed First Nations Education Act?
Well, the proposed First Nations Education Act was pulled together with minimal, if any, consultation with the First Nations, and therefore it's a non-starter for me. Before we talk about any solutions, and we have talked about a number of them, including removing the cap, the 2% cap on First Nations funding increases, and we've talked about making sure that we're investing as much in First Nations education as we are in as provinces invest in their own education per student. We have to understand that.
But do you think that's enough? I mean, we can
no, that's not enough.
No, but with respect to what the provinces invest in education, do you think that it should be at par, or, I mean, a better analysis may show that in fact
it needs to be more. It perhaps needs to be more, but that, I mean, that brings in a whole slew of other challenges around quality of life in our native communities, whether it's running water, or electricity, or housing. It becomes more and more difficult to draw teachers into those communities, and that's maybe why it needs to be more. But certainly starting at least at par as a goal. But all this needs to be done not in deciding from Ottawa that this is what we're doing and this is what we're sending. It needs to begin with saying, how do we sit down and rebuild a broken relationship? Right now we still have a paternalistic approach from the federal government that says, well, this is the solution around First Nations education, this is the solution around matrimonial property rights, this is the solution around... That's the model, the failed model, that has broken this relationship with First Nations peoples over decades and centuries even.
The Chrétien government tried to introduce a First Nations Governance Act, and that went by the wayside, to which Mr. Martin said, okay, I won't impose this on you, I'll give you all 3 years to come up with something as good or better. And they didn't. So what makes you think that if you took that same approach to Education Act, that in 3 years, or less, most likely more, we're going to see come back to us as good or better?
The conversations I've had just over the past year or two with a new generation of First Nations leadership, extraordinary young chiefs and activists who are choosing to be idle no more, are choosing to engage, are reaching a point where the weight, the crushing weight on their communities that was the memory of residential schools across the country is starting to be something they're getting out from under. I think being 10, 20 years further along, the kind of leadership that we're seeing out of First Nations communities is a tremendous source for optimism for me. I think decriminalization is a mistake because it still sends hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, into criminal organizations that actually spend it on and finance serious criminal activities for it. The current approach on drugs is a failure. It's not keeping it out of the hands of our kids. Our kids are greater degrees of pot smokers than anyone else in the developed world. It's time to legalize.
Okay, you said the current approach to drugs. So this is
the current approach to marijuana.
I was just curious. I was thinking, what did your mother do actually these last couple of years? What kind of advice did she give you?
Her advice from the very beginning was very much based around warning me. Worried about me and Sophie and the kids and the cost. I mean, obviously her own experience in politics was so negative that she worries. She also worries the way a mother will, that that people are going to be mean to me, or I'm she says I'm too sensitive for this game. Yeah, I smile. Yeah, sure, I'm sensitive, but I'm also someone who's been surrounded by expectations and ad hominem attacks all my life because of my last name, and I've developed a very thick skin that allows me to filter through the criticisms, the negative criticisms, and look for the pearls of constructive criticism that, despite them, sometimes people slip through at me, but also draw in on the the positive love-ins that I get sometime and disregard them as sometimes, often, as baseless as the baseless attacks, and look through for those kernels of things that I've done right that I can take as productive. I have a very thick skin.